Ambassador, thank you for joining us today. North Korea, according to some, is engaged in some activity right now that makes some people think that they are preparing for a nuclear test. What are you seeing?
No, I agree with that assessment. I think North Korea is preparing for a seventh nuclear test. They have been working on the Punggye-ri nuclear test site for a number of months. According to the IAEA Director General, they've completed one of its major tunnels. So I think a nuclear test, a seventh nuclear test, is imminent.
So that was my question. When do you think this happens? Days, weeks, months? But you just said it, imminent. What does that mean?
I think it could be days, but if I were a betting person, I'd say 1 or 2 weeks. I think North Korea is on the cusp of just moving forward with that nuclear test.
And what's the significance of this seventh test?
It's major, JJ. This is the last test was in 2017, and this was during the period of fire and fury with former President Donald Trump. And it was a thermonuclear test, a very significant, successful thermonuclear test. So this is further, enhancing their nuclear capabilities. This permits North Korea to be more comfortable, if that's the word, with their nuclear arsenal. And that speaks to also weaponization, miniaturization, and mating it with nuclear missile delivery systems.
And that, again, was my next question as well. I think we've talked about this so many times over the last few years that There's a predictable pattern to what we talk about here each time, but it's no less serious each time we talk about it.
Exactly.
North Korea has a stable of delivery systems of rockets that it can use to deliver whatever it wants to deliver in them. Give us a sense of the range of these rockets, these missiles, these delivery systems they have.
Oh, they're very significant arsenal of to include intercontinental ballistic missiles that could reach the whole of the United States. And they reportedly launched one on the 25th of May after President Joe Biden's meetings with President Yoon Suk-yeol in South Korea on the 21st of May. The intercontinental ballistic missiles, intermediate range ballistic missiles that could reach as far as Guam, our facilities in Guam, and short range ballistic missiles that could certainly touch South Korea and Japan. So their arsenal is significant. And on the 5th of June, they just launched 8 short range ballistic missiles. What a message that was indeed to South Korea and to Japan. Because if they could mate a nuclear warhead to those short range ballistic missiles, indeed, that's an existential threat to both South Korea and Japan.
I know we talked about this some years ago, but I think now probably is a very appropriate time to bring this up again. They've had some success, according to some, in terms of mating. Is that accurate?
My personal assessment is yes, they can mate, if you will, a nuclear warhead to missile delivery systems, whether it's short range, intermediate, or long range, intercontinental. So yes, I do believe they're capable of mating a nuclear warhead to these intercontinental short range and intermediate range ballistic missiles. The question, however, is they've got to still test to determine once you launch, if you will, let's take a short range ballistic missile or intercontinental ballistic missile, it has to come back into our atmosphere. And will it burn up? Will it be successful? And that's the question mark that a number of specialists who look at this issue have. Will they be capable of being they can do all of the above? Will a launch of that nature succeed re-entering our atmosphere? Will it burn up, or will it be successful?
That is a very, very troubling question. So would North Korea actually do this? Would they actually launch a nuclear tipped missile?
My assessment, JJ, is, and I've said this before in our conversations, they're not suicidal. I think North Korea realizing that if they launched a nuclear weapon at one of our allies, South Korea, Japan, indeed the United States, they would be wiped out. They're not suicidal in that regard. So in that, when we talk about that, that's for North Korea, that's a nuclear deterrent. Having this capability deters any other country, i.e. the United States, from invading, doing anything to affect regime change, because they have a capability of striking back as a deterrent. Having said that, however, over the last few months, North Korea has been very outspoken in saying, not only are there nuclear weapons there for, if you will, deterrence purposes, they're also there if there's a perceived threat to the survival of North Korea. They could use those nuclear weapons. And indeed, if there's a perceived threat, they may even preemptively use those nuclear missiles to attack an adversary.
Well, that changes the game a lot. A first strike policy changes the game a lot. So that means that, you know, the U.S., the West, and everybody else that keeps an eye on what North Korea is doing would then have to gauge whether or not North Korea might be ready to pull the trigger on something. And I think that leads us to what you talk about all the time, and that is the possibility for mistakes.
I totally agree with your assessment. Absolutely. And this is coming from Kim Jong-un, the recent language from Kim Jong-un. If there's a perceived threat, if Kim Jong-un feels North Korea, his regime is being threatened, he's saying, I'll use my nuclear weapons. Maybe he's taking a page out of the playbook that Putin has used in Ukraine, where he's put nuclear weapons right on the table, immediately on the table, saying that there's always that potential of using it. So yes, I think that's a very important issue. If North Korea gets it wrong, if their perception is totally inaccurate, because I just don't see South Korea, the United States, Japan, any of us doing anything untoward towards North Korea to attack their government. But it's his optic. It's not what our intentions are. It's how he sees our actions. Does he see our actions as if you will, a threat to the survival of his country, his regime?
One more thing. What's the U.S. going to do about this in the West? What's the West and the U.S. doing? You've sat across the table from North Korean envoys, you as the former special envoy to the six-party talks from the U.S. You've sat across the table from them and negotiated a deal with them, but they broke that deal, and they haven't done anything significant since then. That significant, at least. So, what does the West do? What does the U.S. do from your point of view right now? What's your advice?
Well, I think with the President Joe Biden's visit with South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol on the 21st of May, I think correctly they spoke about enhancing deterrence, enhancing our joint military exercises, introducing strategic assets into the region to show to North Korea that we will not tolerate. South Korea, we, our allies in Japan also, will not tolerate their escalation and intimidation and threats. And we respond. And in fact, we did respond on the 5th of June, when North Korea launched 8 short-range ballistic missiles. We and our South Korean allies launched 8 surface-to-surface missiles. A very clear message to Kim Jong-un that with this new government in South Korea, Yoon Suk-yeol, and with the commitment from the United States, extended deterrence, our commitment was reiterated a number of times, and certainly by President Joe Biden to President Yoon, that we are there for the protection of our allies in South Korea and Japan. So I think what we're doing is we're enhancing our deterrence capabilities. Unfortunately, sanctions are not working for one major reason, because we don't have China and Russia supporting UN Security Council resolutions that would sanction North Korea for their violations of UN Security Council resolutions that prohibit the launching of ballistic missiles. So we just saw that recently in the last week, where North Korea launched an ICBM, and then they did the short-range ballistic missiles. We tried to get some sanctions imposed at the UN Security Council, and China and Russia vetoed those proposals.
You know, sometimes it takes something personal to get people's attentions. It takes a disaster that impacts a country before they take some kind of step to do something. And
Right.
that may be what the case is with Russia and China. They have always vetoed any efforts to stop North Korea from doing this, and most likely because it's no skin off of their noses. But if there was some skin off their nose one day, perhaps their view would change.
Well, JJ, if I could comment on that, I think for China, to a great extent for Russia, North Korea with nuclear weapons has to be of concern in Beijing and in Moscow. Because if there's instability in North Korea, we're talking about loose nuclear weapons, and where will those weapons go? And inciting the U.S. with our allies in South Korea and Japan with joint military exercises, enhancing those exercises, introducing strategic assets to the region, and the possibility of conflict on the Korean Peninsula. This is not what Xi Jinping wants. I think he's got enough issues on his plate, with their own economic situation, but also dealing with an ally in Russia that's invaded Ukraine. And how do you square that one? Because China has a lot of equities with Ukraine and with the European Union that are being affected by Russian aggression. So I think China has to understand, and I think they do understand, North Korea with nuclear weapons is not in their interest. But it's a question of how far will they go to get North Korea to come back to negotiations, to get them to stop this escalation. That is the question. And indeed, that has to be the issue the Biden administration has to be working on, getting China to use more of its leverage with North Korea to get them to stop the escalation.
Ambassador Joe Detrani, thank you as always.
Thank you, JJ.